Let's dive in. It's interesting how they frame a conflict, you know? They don't see it as a sign of a failing marriage. It's more like an inevitable part of growing together.
Okay.
They actually say disagreements, when you handle them the right way, they can lead to a deeper understanding, a stronger bond even.
That's a refreshing take.
Yeah.
It takes the pressure off, you know? Like, you don't have to strive for this perfect conflict-free relationship.
Exactly. It's more realistic.
But how do they actually suggest approaching those disagreements? Because let's face it, sometimes things can get pretty heated.
Well, they have this whole section on fighting fair.
Fighting fair.
Yeah, it's about establishing some ground rules, so to speak, for when you disagree, so things don't, spiral out of control.
So having some structure, some boundaries, even in the middle of an argument. I like that. What kind of ground rules are we talking about?
Oh, they give some really practical examples, like no name calling.
Okay, that makes sense.
No bringing up past hurts.
Right.
And maybe most importantly, taking breaks. If things get too intense,
Step away.
Yeah, everyone needs time to cool down, process their emotions. Then you can come back and have a productive conversation.
Oh, absolutely. It's so easy to say things you regret in the heat of the moment. Taking a break allows you to, step back, gather your thoughts, and approach the situation with a clearer head.
Exactly. And they emphasize the importance of really listening to understand, not just to respond.
Right.
Trying to see things from your partner's perspective, even if you don't agree.
It's about empathy, isn't it? Putting yourself in your partner's shoes.
Precisely. They also talk about using I statements.
Oh, yeah.
Expressing your feelings without blaming.
Right.
So instead of, you always make me feel, it's more like, I feel hurt when...
Subtle shift, but I can see how that would make a difference.
It changes how the message is received.
It's about taking ownership of your own feelings.
Exactly. They don't just talk about conflict resolution in general terms.
Okay.
They actually delve into those unique challenges and dynamics that come with being a man and a woman in a marriage.
Yeah, that's huge. Because men and women, we're wired differently.
We are.
And sometimes those differences, they lead to misunderstandings, frustration, if we're not careful.
Absolutely. They actually talk about how men and women think differently.
Wait, really? So it's not just societal conditioning. There's a biological basis for these differences.
That's what the research suggests, yeah. And they give practical examples of how these differences play out in marriage, like how we approach conflict.
I've seen that firsthand. It's like speaking different languages sometimes.
They say women often want to talk things through, process their emotions, while men might withdraw or try to fix the problem quickly without necessarily talking about it.
So true. And it can be so frustrating when you don't understand those differences. You might think your spouse isn't taking your feelings seriously, when really they're just processing things differently.
Exactly. And their point is, neither approach is wrong. It's about recognizing and respecting those differences.
Communication is key. Again, understanding where your partner is coming from can make all the difference.
Absolutely. And they even suggest that these differences can actually make the marriage stronger, if you learn to leverage them, that is.
Okay, how so?
Well, for example, when making decisions, they found they make better choices as a couple because they bring different perspectives to the table.
Two heads are better than one, but in this case, two different kinds of heads.
Exactly. And they apply this to romance, too.
Ooh, this is interesting. Because, let's be real, sometimes what one person finds romantic, the other might find totally cheesy.
They encourage couples to talk openly about what makes them feel loved and appreciated.
So it's not about playing games or trying to manipulate your spouse. It's about being intentional and thoughtful.
Exactly. It's about understanding your spouse's love language and then speaking it.
We all have different ways of feeling loved.
Right. They talk about how women often appreciate words of affirmation, acts of service, while men might value physical touch, quality time spent together.
It's about figuring out what makes your partner feel truly loved and valued, and then putting in the effort to express your love in a way that resonates with them.
Now, going back to that idea of making your home a shelter in the storm, remember that?
Yes.
They talk about what that means practically. Creating a safe, supportive environment where you both feel comfortable sharing your struggles.
So being a good listener, offering empathy, not judging each other's reactions. Because sometimes when you're going through something tough, the last thing you need is judgment from the person you're supposed to be able to rely on.
Exactly. They even say it's okay to seek support outside the marriage if you need it.
From friends, family.
Yeah, or even a therapist. Sometimes you need a fresh perspective, and it's not a sign of weakness to reach out for help.
It's about recognizing when you need extra support.
Exactly. And it's interesting, their faith really shines through here.
How so?
They talk about their shared belief in God being a source of strength and comfort throughout their marriage.
Like having a shared foundation of faith.
It gives them a sense of purpose that goes beyond just the day-to-day ups and downs.
That's beautiful.
And you know what? They take it a step further. They encourage couples to actually make their home a mission field.
Wow, a mission field. So it's more than just being a good couple.
Right. It's about using your marriage to make a positive impact on the world around you.
That's pretty powerful.
They talk about serving others together, being hospitable, sharing their faith. They really walk the walk, too.
What do you mean?
Well, they open their home to others, they volunteer in their community, they prioritize their spiritual growth, both individually and as a couple.
That's inspiring. It reminds me that marriage isn't just about our own happiness.
It can be a force for good in the world.
Okay, so let's get real for a second and talk about something that often causes tension in marriage. Finances.
Oh, yeah. Money matters.
EB and Mina, they don't shy away from it. They even talk about their own struggles with money, especially early on as students.
They're very open about it.
Oh, I bet a lot of people could relate to that. Finances can be such a stressor, especially when you're just starting out.
They stress the importance of communication, being transparent when it comes to money, no secrets.
And it makes sense, being on the same page.
Yeah.
If you're not, it can lead to resentment, conflict.
They're big advocates for budgeting and living within your means, too. They actually share some of their strategies.
Oh, what kind of strategies?
Things like buying in bulk, cooking meals at home, simple stuff, but it makes a difference.
It's a good reminder that financial responsibility doesn't have to mean deprivation.
Right.
It's about making conscious choices.
And prioritizing.
And you know what? I love this. They say financial challenges, they can actually make a marriage stronger if you face them together as a team, not letting money become a wedge.
It's about being on the same page, supporting each other, being in it together.
Celebrating those small victories along the way.
Yeah.
Because honestly, sticking to a budget, that can feel like a huge win.
They connect it back to their faith here, too.
How so?
They talk about tithing, even when money was tight, trusting that God would provide. It's an example of their faith in action.
That's powerful.
And it reminds us that our finances are ultimately in God's hands.
So even in those areas of life that feel really practical, like managing money, faith can play a big role.
Now, let's dive into something that can be really tough for couples: negativity and conflict.
Oh boy, here we go. Because, let's be real, no marriage is immune to disagreements, frustrations.
They acknowledge that up front.
Sometimes those negative feelings can really build up, even create a toxic atmosphere.
They talk about recognizing that negativity bias we talked about earlier.
Right, how our brains are wired for the negative.
We have to actively focus on the positive, not let those negative thoughts take over.
Easier said than done sometimes, though, right? Our brains are like trained to notice flaws, problems. How do you actually shift that mindset?
They offer some great advice. Practicing gratitude, for one.
Okay.
Focusing on solutions instead of just dwelling on the problems.
Right.
Choosing to speak kindly even when you're upset.
Ooh, that's a tough one.
It is. But they're basically saying that negativity can be contagious, but so can positivity.
You're creating a more uplifting atmosphere.
Exactly. And remember that idea of fighting fair.
Yeah.
It's not about winning or losing. It's about resolving the conflict in a way that makes the relationship stronger.
It's like remembering you're on the same team.
Exactly. They share their own guidelines. No name calling, no dredging up the past, and taking those breaks when you need them.
Those are really practical tips.
Right.
It's not just theory. You can actually implement this stuff.
And that's what I appreciate about this book. It's full of real life stuff, personal stories, practical advice you can use.
It's not just a feel-good marriage book. It's a guide for navigating the messy reality of building a life together.
Now, before we move on, remember they talk about those differences between men and women?
Yeah.
And how important it is to embrace those differences?
Yes.
Well, they specifically highlight recognizing each other's ideas of romance.
Oh, this is a good one. Because what one person finds romantic, the other might find, completely cringy.
Exactly. They actually encourage couples to have a real honest conversation about what makes them feel loved. appreciated.
So it's about understanding your spouse's love language and making an effort to speak it.
You got it.
Because we all have different ways of experiencing love.
Right. And it's not about playing games or manipulating your spouse.
It's about being intentional, being thoughtful.
It's those small everyday gestures that really matter.
They build that foundation of love and connection.
Now, remember that whole concept of marriage as a shelter in the storm?
Yes.
Well, they actually unpack what that means practically.
Because it's one thing to say, I'll be there for you. But when those storms actually hit, it can be a lot harder to navigate those rough waters.
Right. It's easy to say, harder to do.
So what do they suggest?
Well, they talk about creating that safe and supportive environment where you both feel comfortable being vulnerable.
So being a good listener.
Offering empathy.
Not judging.
Exactly. And sometimes, they say, you might even need to seek support outside the marriage.
Therapy, you mean?
Yeah, or from friends, family. Sometimes you just need a fresh perspective.
It's not a weakness to ask for help.
And they talk about the importance of forgiveness because, let's be honest, in any marriage, there are going to be hurts.
Disappointments, yeah.
And if you hold on to that anger, that resentment, it can poison the relationship.
So forgiveness is essential.
For healing, for moving forward, for both of you.
Absolutely.
And they connect this back to their faith. They see forgiveness as a reflection of God's grace, God's mercy.
A beautiful way to look at it.
Forgiveness isn't about letting the other person off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from the burden of that anger.
So you can experience more love, more healing.